We're here at the kever of the Noda Biyhudah, of Yechezkel Landau. People always wonder, why is he called the Noda Biyhudah? Well, his two most well-known Sfarim are Noda Biyhudah, Yehuda was his father, and Slach Tzion Lenefesh Chaya, Chaya was his mother. What a beautiful token to name his Sfarim after his parents, Yehuda being his father, and Chaya being his mother. Noda Biyhudah, Shal Sechuvas, one of the most classic series of Shal Sechuvas that we have, and the Tzlach are one of the great Chidushim we have on Shas. Well, the Noda Biyhudah actually ordered that upon his demise, only a small tombstone be made, and that's why in the back, by the Makkah Menuchasai, you have only a very, very small tombstone. However, the Kehila, he said for his wife you can make a much larger tombstone, and because he credited, he writes in the Hakdam, in the introduction of Shal Sechuvas, Noda Biyhudah, it's mentioned that during the work week, he spent the entire week in the shul. He didn't come home at night, while his wife remained at home in Galmuda, Almana, meaning Kamat, she didn't see him. So he credits his success to the Mesiras Nefesh of his wife. It's interesting to get a little of the background of the history of the Noda Biyhudah. So you have in Shal Sechuvas Noda Biyhudah Even Ezer Simon Pei Zayin that he writes he found in the ancient chronicles of Prague that his great-grandfather was the Rebbe Reb Heschel, and his great-uncle was the Maral of Prague. Elsewhere in Noda Biyhudah, Simon Chaf Aleph, he writes, because I'm a descendant of Rashi, therefore I must endeavor to try to explain the words of Rashi in a deeper way, which is interesting, because the Noda Biyhudah was a Levi, so to say that he came from Rashi, that means some way, mitzad imay, he came from Rashi. Now, I just want to take the opportunity, hopefully we'll have a chance to go to the kever of the Shal Sechuvas Tshuva Me'ava. That's Rabbi Lezer Flackles, which was his primary disciple. Now, Rabbi Lezer Flackles points out the Noda Biyhudah revisited the concept of the shiurim of Kazayas and Kabeya, and the Noda Biyhudah made measurements based on thumb, and the Noda Biyhudah determined that the Kazayas and the Kabeya shrunk, and therefore they need to be doubled. So the opinion of Noda Biyhudah, which actually we paskin like Noda Biyhudah by the Oraisa, we're choishesh, we're concerned perhaps the measurements shrunk and we need to double them. Now, Rabbi Lezer Flackles in Chela Gimel Simon Tav Zayin writes that he came to Noda Biyhudah, and I point this out because the Noda Biyhudah says his Rabbi was Mishichmai Ulamala Gavaya Mikala Am. Noda Biyhudah was the tallest man in the generation. He was a very, very tall person, something like 7 feet tall. You know, we don't know exactly, but he's exceptional. And therefore, says Rabbi Lezer Flackles, his thumb was double the size of any other person. And that's why he determined, says Rabbi Lezer Flackles, that the shear shrunk. And says Rabbi Lezer Flackles, I went to my Rebbe, and I told him, Rebbe, maybe the reason your measurements are different is because your thumb is literally double the size of an average person's thumb. And Rabbi Lezer Flackles writes, yes, the Noda Biyhudah nodded his head and smiled. However, the Chazon Ish writes that this is all pitpute mili ba'alma, that the Noda Biyhudah did not agree to this accusation. The Noda Biyhudah certainly measured it by the average person's thumb. He didn't measure by his own thumb, and therefore we need to take the Noda Biyhudah's measurement very seriously. Now, Noda Biyhudah is a very handsome person. In the Divrei Yedidah, sort of an introduction of Shal Sechuvas Noda Biyhudah, it's written that you could tell from the appearance, the royal, regal, handsome appearance of Noda Biyhudah, that he was an exceptional Ish Elikim. Just to say a famous Dvar Torah that the Noda Biyhudah mentioned, but this is a Dvar Torah the Noda Biyhudah said when he was 12 years old. There was a story where there was two brothers that got into a very bitter disagreement, and one brother said, finally, he swears, I'm never going to look at you again. And unfortunately, the brother who he swore not to see again died. And at his shiva, he was, the living brother felt so bad that he felt he needs to go ask mechila of this brother that he swore I'm not going to see again. But he made a shvuah, he made an oath. So Noda Biyhudah spoke up at 12 years old and he said, seeing someone in their demise is not called seeing them, and the proof being, Moshe Rabbeinu tells Paroi, we will never again see the Egyptians. And yet, after Kriyas Yamsuf, Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meis al Sfas Hayam, we saw them dead. From here, says Noda Biyhudah, at only 12 years old, we derive that at seeing someone in their demise is not considered seeing them. Okay, I want to point out that already when the Noda Biyhudah was a very young man, he was getting very complex shilas from Gedolei Yisrael, from the Oistrovtsa. Okay, this is a very important point that I would like to make, and this maybe is the great legacy of the Noda Biyhudah. In many tshuvas we find that he was asked questions about Kabbalistic practices, to which the Noda B'Yehuda, now you have to understand the background, where the Noda B'Yehuda, the history of the times. Noda B'Yehuda is in the aftermath of the Shabtai Tzvi. You had personalities and people who were very immersed in Kabbalah, and it's almost teetering on connection still to Shabtos. And the Noda B'Yehuda's policy was, he would say, "V'ha'emes," I'm quote from Noda B'Yehuda, Tinyana, Archaim Siman Kuftes, "Ein li esek ben astaros." I don't get involved in the secrets of the Torah. Halavai she'uchal lotzeis yidei chayvasi betalmud u'poiskim. Halavai, if I can only fulfill my obligation in the Gemara and the Poiskim, hanechutzim lamaisa, which is needed for our practice, v'hem chayenu, this is our life, u'vahem ne'egeh. Meaning the policy and the great focus and emphasis of Noda B'Yehuda, and really his legacy, is the critical importance of Gemara, that's our life, and that is what Judaism is based on. So in another tshuva in Tinyana, Archaim Siman Reish Aleph, the Noda B'Yehuda says, Ani ba'anyi, I in my poverty, Ani sameach bechelki chelek hanigla, I rejoice in my share in Torah, which is the hidden share, Shas u'poiskim ve'enli, Esek ben astaros, halavai shechelek hanigla, yala biyadei, halavai I should learn the Shas and poiskim. But I will say that doesn't mean the Noda B'Yehuda was not familiar with the Kabbalistic texts. In the Divrei Yedidos of Shas, which was Noda B'Yehuda, his son brings down that in fact he learned with Reb Chaim Sanzer, and he was well versed in all the Kabbalistic texts. It's only that on an open policy level, Noda B'Yehuda held that the safer, more secure, more straight path for the Jewish people is based on Shas and Poiskim. Let me just give you an example of this, and with this we'll conclude. In the Drushei Hatzlach, Drush Yotes Ois Beis, and this is really a primary example of where you see how the Noda B'Yehuda valued the foundation of Shas and Poskim. It's well known. Mishnah Berurah brings this down. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz brings down. Soon we're going to be in the Yemei Elul, and then in the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. There's a concept that the 7 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on each of these days you could rectify a corresponding day of the entire year. So on Sunday Aseres Yemei Tshuva, you could fix all the Sundays of the year. On Monday Aseres Yemei Tshuva, you could fix all the Mondays, and so on and so forth. This is the great idea of the Arizal. Well, says the Drushei Hatzlach, says the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, I found proof in the Gemara to this idea. What does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, Rav Idi, Breid Rabbi Yaakov, it's a Gemara in Chagiga, Hey Amud Beis, he would go 3 months on the road, he would stay 1 day by his host, 1 day by the Rebbe, and then travel back 3 months, and they called him Bar Bei Rav Dechad Yoima. Says Rabbi Yochanan, we learn from the pasuk Va'oisi Yom Yom Yidrashu V'das Deracha Yechpatzon, that is it possible that just to learn Torah 1 day, but rather, says the Gemara, anyone who learns Torah 1 day, it's as if they've learned Torah the entire year. Well, it says in Noda B'Yehuda, this is very strong basis for the concept of the Arizal, that every day of the Aseres Yemei Tshuva you could reconcile and you could be mashlim and be mesake in the entire year. So actually you see from this Gemara that any day of the year, if you delve and you immerse yourself in Torah v'avodah, you could correct the entire year. But to the Noda B'Yehuda, even a Kabbalistic idea is only as strong as its shoresh and its foundation in Talmud Bavli. This was the great legacy of the Noda B'Yehuda. There are many practices mentioned in the Tshuvas Noda B'Yehuda, Kabbalistic practices, where Noda B'Yehuda would say, that this is not something that he partakes of. His Messiah, which he writes, goes back to his deceased Rabbeim, was based on the Gemara, Shas, U'Poiskim. So what a great zchus is it to be here at the kever of Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, one of the all-time great Poiskim, leaders, Manhige, Klal Yisrael, Yehi Zichrei Baruch, and his Zikaron should be a Me'el Yosher for the entire Klal Yisrael.